This episode is brought to you in part by Museum of the Bible and its new worship experience, All Creation Sings, made in partnership with Creator. Step into an immersive room with vibrant visuals, soundscapes of praise, and interactive displays illuminating the story of worship. Get tickets at museumofthebible.org/ACS.
Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. Today, I sit down with Proverbs 31 Bible teacher, Dr. Joel Muddam. We discuss how he's found that practicing humility significantly reduces anxiety, fear, and weakness. We also discuss how his experience of being bullied and his son's medical challenges have shaped his understanding of humility and its role in finding peace. Plus, you'll get to hear my absolute delight to talk to someone who loves basketball as much as I do. If you enjoy our conversation, please share it with a friend. That is the best compliment you can give me as a podcaster. Good morning, Joel, and welcome to the Grace Enough podcast.
Thanks, Amber. I'm so excited to be with you.
Yes, we've made the connection that we're not too far away from one another. So that is always fun to know that someone else is in North Carolina along with me, but not born and raised here, right?
Right. Not born and raised here. I was born and raised in the great land of Chicago, deep dish pizza, Michael Jordan winning the repeat the three-peat. So there is kind of, the nostalgic like Charlotte, North Carolina connection with MJ.
Oh, yes.
So,
Okay, so then that must mean we are close to the same age. Sorry if you're a person who doesn't like to talk about your age, but see, I was a huge Charles Barkley fan, so I hated you and your people.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. MJ single-handedly made sure that Charles. The only reason Hakeem Olajuwon gets 2 championships is because MJ retires for those 2 years. And I think everybody at that time period was so frustrated that it was Hakeem that won them. Irritated, yeah.
Irritated. My son now, he's 14. And of course, he loves basketball. And so he knows all the things about the NBA. And I'm such an old lady because I'm like, you don't even know how good it used to be or what real rivalries used to be like.
Listen, you're not alone. You're not alone. I am the dad. I've got 3 boys, Liam, Levi, and Luke. And I'm the dad that will sit them down. Yeah, I'll sit them down in front of the YouTube thing on our TV. And I'll literally play Michael Jordan playoffs. Like when the playoffs are happening, I will have them also watch like playoff series from the past, and I'll be like, boys, I want you to pay attention to the difference of the game.
Oh my gosh.
Look what Jordan is doing, compared to anyways, this isn't a sports podcast, but it seems like it could quickly become one.
I know, because I can't let it die quite yet, only because I grew up in Kentucky, which means like you were born like just living, eating, breathing basketball. And so when my kids get going on it, I'm just like, you don't know anything. I know everything.
Oh yeah. I'm with you.
Oh, I love it. All right. Well, I love, now that we've actually talked about that for 5 minutes, I also love to start out conversations here with getting to know guests by asking, how did they first come to know Christ? Like, what did your early faith journey look like?
Yeah, so I actually read about this in my book, The Hidden Peace, that released earlier this year. And I'm Indian. If you guys could see me, you'd see that I'm Indian. My grandparents are missionaries in India, and so
awesome.
It's pretty amazing. India is massive in terms of population, and Christianity is like the very bottom of the religious category. And so to have an Indian who grew up, I grew up in a Christian household, is incredibly rare. I view it as God's sovereignty and his providence in my life, his kindness in a lot of ways. And so my grandparents heard the gospel from some British missionaries, and they came to know Jesus. And so all I ever knew, Amber, was really the story of Jesus. I actually lived in India for 2.5 years. I was born in Chicago, and then when I was around 2, my mom sent me to live in India with my grandparents and all my aunts and uncles. And my very first memories are of the story of Jesus, my grandfather going to very rural villages, sharing the gospel, the good news, to to a group of people called the Untouchables, which is the lowest of the caste system that India
Yep.
lived by. I would argue still continues to live by in some ways. And so yeah, that was kind of my introduction to Jesus. And then, like a lot of people, I went through a season of rebellion and running away from really God's call in my life. I kind of wanted to do my own thing. And then in high school, I just had a youth pastor who just
Mm.
wouldn't leave me alone. He just would not leave me alone. And
Oh my
I'm
gosh, I
very
love that.
indebted to that youth pastor and to that group of youth leaders that made a marked moment in my life. And it was at a high school retreat that I just heard clearly from the Lord. It was a message. I don't even remember who preached that message. That's how crazy it was. I don't remember who preached that message. I don't remember what the main text was. I don't remember, I just remember there's just one line at the very end that just said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." And my whole life changed. That
It's
started me on a
so
trajectory.
incredible because there's a lot of things that I hear there, but there's a couple of things because even in some books, and I'm a part of New City Fellows here in Raleigh, and we talk a lot about really Josh Chatrow has written a lot about it too. This idea that it has to be the work of God because almost all people say, I have no idea who was preaching. I
Yeah.
have no idea what was said.
Yeah.
I just know that there was something in me that I could not go forward, or I could not pray the prayer, or whatever it is that you determine. And it's amazing how many times I've heard that.
Yeah, and I mean, theologians and technical terms. I mean, I think I was saved already at that time,
Yeah.
but it was
Like
all it was
surrender.
yeah, it was a sense of surrender. It was the ongoing process of what I think I would call irresistible grace. Like, I don't think irresistible grace just happens at the moment of your awareness of Jesus. I think there is this gravitational pull that's
Mhm.
happening, that Jesus is continually drawing us into his life, and it looks different for different people. And for
Mhm.
me, the way that it looked like was a journey into theological development and formation, many, many years of school, academic training, into the place where I am today.
I
So
love it.
yeah, kind of a wild story. If you ask me, like, hey, could you just watch the trajectory from A to Z in your life and pinpoint it, I'd be like, there's no way.
You're
Like, if
right.
you want evidence of a good and gracious God, you can just
Mm.
watch the trajectory of my story and say,
Oh,
only God could connect all those dots and lines. And even my theological journey, I'm a bit of a
yeah.
theological mutt, and I've
Yeah,
been, you know,
you are.
academically, people would be like, wait a minute, you went to a Presbyterian seminary and then a Baptist PhD school, but your undergrad was at a Assemblies of God Charismatic Bible College. Like, how does that work? And my answer is Jesus, like
Yeah.
Jesus. So
Well, I think oftentimes those types of journeys just also open our heart up to the work of Christ in a different way, because not only do you see some of the frustrations that can happen against denominational lines, but you see the beauty of, like you said, grace, God's grace at work in people who honestly, the only thing they really have in common a lot of times is the word of God in Christ.
amen. That's so true. So true.
This episode is brought to you in part by Beyond Ordinary Women Ministries, which prepares Christian women for leadership. At BOW, we believe that every woman is a leader because she influences someone. So, whom do you influence? Do you mentor a woman? Serve in the workplace? Or do you lead a small group, teach the Bible, or even lead an entire ministry? No matter who or how many you influence, our free online resources will help equip you. Our videos, podcast episodes, and articles from experienced women leaders will encourage you and perfect your leadership skills. They offer wisdom for dealing with ministry pitfalls, current biblical issues, health for your own soul, and insights for shepherding others well. In addition, BOW offers Bible studies designed to connect women of multiple generations. They provide a challenge to both women new to the Bible and those wanting to dig deeper. Be our guest and browse all of our free resources and low-cost Bible studies at beyondordinarywomen.org.
So tell me this before we dive into actually some of those things that you're talking about, the trajectory of your life and how that kind of crashes, or maybe I should say intertwines with
Hmm.
humility. You said that you had a youth pastor who just wouldn't leave you alone. And
Yeah.
I want to know that because currently I am an interim youth coordinator at our church while we're searching for a new youth pastor.
Hmm.
And I'm just curious to know, like, what do you mean when you say he wouldn't leave you alone?
I would say, I mean, this is exactly what it was. He would not stop inviting me
Mm.
into opportunity to
Yeah.
exercise gifts, exercise areas of just places that I could participate in the youth ministry. But more than that,
Mm.
he would not stop inviting me into relationship with him, with his family. I grew up
Oh,
in a
wow.
bit of a complicated family. Like my family dynamic was challenging in many ways,
Mhm.
and so Rick and his family,
Mm.
they invite like I had dinners
Yep.
with him, and when they had their first daughter, like I was there, like you like all of that kind of stuff. And so and it wasn't just me. Ricky had kind of a group of us that he
Wow.
just saw. I think he prayed, and would have to ask him all the details about this, but he just would not leave me alone, and he could
Mm.
see that God was up to something,
Wow.
and he wanted to be faithful to that. I learned my love for theology, asking good questions, creativity, probably from Ricky. My discipleship moments were on a river when he did his very best to try to teach me how to fly fish, because he is a master fly fisherman, and not many places to fly fish in Illinois, so we'd have to drive to different places. And so, man, I don't know that I ever caught a fish fly
Mm.
fishing, but to this day, I love fly fishing. Like if I can get
Wow.
out on a river, I'm not good at it at all, but that's what discipleship looked like. Just
Yep.
quiet
Yep.
moments on a river. Sometimes we never even talked for hours. We were just so far apart from each other, fishing, and then come back together and just process life together. And so,
Mm.
I would
Time.
say, yeah, time,
Yep.
time. And here's the other thing about Rick. He was not infatuated by charisma. He was not
Mm.
drawn by I was not a cool kid in high school, Amber. Like
I love that.
there were many other high school like kids that came into our youth group that you would just think, pick that guy to disciple or pick that girl to disciple because she's so cool, and they're gonna draw on all their cool kid friends. Like I
Wow.
was a nerd. Like I was friends with some cool kids, but I wasn't a cool kid.
Ugh.
And Ricky just was not. He wasn't willing to just play, I guess, a game of like, hey, if we get the cool kids and then we can get all, like he was just
Mm.
like, no, I'm going, like, who are the ones that are here? Who are the ones that are committed? Who are the ones that God has a hand on? Like let's pray and develop and disciple in
Oh
those
my gosh, that
spaces.
is a good word for me in the middle
Yeah.
of this right now. So thank you for that. Yeah, I just I could again, as we were talking about with basketball, I could go a whole different direction, but we're going to come back and talk about The Hidden Piece, which is a book that you've recently released. And
Hmm.
part of that, the part of the story that you share in the book is about your years of being bullied and medical conditions of your son and just a variety of things that kind of led you to explore humility.
Yeah.
And so share a little bit about those experiences and kind of, how did those lead you into that path?
Yeah, there's I opened the book with this story about, I lived in India for those
Mhm.
2 years. My mom was finishing nursing school. My dad was working night shifts as an X-ray technician, and so during that season, I went to live with my grandparents. My first language was Telugu, which is one of the major dialects in India, and I
Pause. What
could,
part of India? Because I've been to southern India, but I know
yeah.
that's not the dialect in like Tuticorin.
Yeah, yeah. So we're in Hyderabad. So ours is like Andhra Pradesh district, Hyderabad area, and so like they're famous for Hyderabadi biryani. If you've never had
Mhm.
biryani,
Oh, I've had
then
biryani.
oh, so so like
It's delicious.
that times 100. I think Hyderabad is known for they're famous for their biryani. So you can imagine, 5-year-old, whatever age I was when I came back to the States to
Mhm.
live with my parents. It was a challenge of transitioning into this foreign culture, this foreign world, the language, the food
Yeah.
was all different, right? And so basically, my first moment that I actually remember the rug kind of getting pulled underneath me. Like I think everybody has that feeling,
Yeah.
either you've had it, or it's whatever. I think everybody's had it, and we're all fearful of when it's going to happen again. Like
Yep.
that moment where you think you're totally fine, and all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out of you, and you're upside down, wondering how long am I going to be falling before I hit the ground,
Yeah.
and there's a tension to that. And so this was my first moment. I walked into that class, couldn't really speak English very well, just a couple words, but had a high receptive understanding. I could
Mhm.
understand English well. And the teacher asked this question, like, hey, does anybody have any pet animals? And I'm like, yes, I'm gonna be the first one to answer. Like, I want to show everybody that I belong here, that I've got this sense of confidence and stability and control. And so I raised my hand and I said dog, and then the teacher's like, oh, that's awesome, and asked a follow-up questions. I hate follow-up questions, so
Mm.
this is why right here. This was my moment of trauma, I guess you could call it, where
Oh.
she was like, oh, that's great. What's your dog's name? And I panicked. I'm
Oh.
like, I didn't have the words, right? So I was just like, dog. And then at this point, all the kids started to laugh and giggle a little bit.
Yeah.
And even the teacher smirked a bit. And then she did this thing like, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like, same question, just said slower, like as
Yes.
if that's going to help us understand the question. No, what is, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it just and then she asked again. I just said dog. And then everybody bursted into laughter
Oh
because they realized like I
gosh.
couldn't talk, like I couldn't speak English.
Right.
And that was that first moment for me when I realized the world is unsafe.
Mm.
People can be hurtful, even if the teacher didn't mean to be hurtful. The
Hmm.
laughter around me was so painful. And I had this kind of vow that when I look back on it, I recognize what it was is I had this vow like I'm never going to be the dumbest person in a room. I'm never
Mm.
going to walk into a room and be made fun of before anybody can make fun of me. I'm going to flip the script and be able to make fun of them first or to deflect the
Oh wow.
situation so I'm never in a position of hurt. And really all that is
It's
pride.
pride. Hmm.
It's an exercise of pride, but the source of that pride in this situation for me was to deal with my fears.
Hmm.
Fear of being hurt, fear of being let down, fear of losing control.
Hmm.
And so that's where kind of pride stepped in. And I have tried everything. Amber, I thought that after my PhD program, I would get to be called Dr. Joel or get to put, those letters PhD after my
Mm.
name. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm finally going to arrive. And honestly, all I find out at the end of this whole journey is how much I don't know. Like there's more, like the dissertation just teaches you how much you don't know, how vast this space is. And then I was kind of fascinated along the way that the people in scripture, it seems like, and the people in my life, I think of Rick and I think of just people who just made such a significant difference, professors of mine, pastors of
Mm.
mine, ministry leaders that just really seemed to have a type of peace that was not conditioned on situations and circumstances. You
Mm.
know, like they had a peace that was present through all the pain and
Hmm.
through, and I'm like, how? How is that possible? And that's what led me to study and research humility. Humility is truly the hidden peace that we're longing for to experience the strength and the stability and the security, ultimately the rest, the shalom of God
Mm.
that Jesus invites us to in Matthew 11:28 and 29 in this exchange of yokes. And so I personally felt it when my son Lucas, he's 9 years old now, turning 9 when he was 11 months old, and he had a febrile seizure. And
Wow.
we were
Wow.
driving. We had to pull the car over. We're on our way to Indianapolis, and I mean, talk about the most terrifying moment in the life of a parent. Like our number one goal is to keep these children safe, right? It's
Yep.
like if we had like a document that we signed that said this is your number one thing, keep your children safe. And here I'm holding my 11-month-old son. He was, which I didn't know at the moment. It looked like to me that he had a stroke. Half his body was limp, paralyzed.
Ugh,
Basically, he was non-responsive.
it's
He
your
was as
worst nightmare.
hot as a missile. And in that moment, I realized that every ounce of control that I thought I had was an absolute illusion.
Mm.
I could not will him of my own strength, of my own power, of my own accord to awaken. I could not will the ambulance to get there faster. Like I was truly in a place of surrender in that moment. And what I found was at that precise moment when I felt acutely the intensity of my weakness and my inability and my lack of control ended up being the perfect place where God made present, made known his
Mm.
power, his strength, his ability. The place where my inability begins is the perfect place for his vastless, endless ability to begin. And so that's kind of the journey that both
Yeah.
personally and theologically kind of led me to this place of like, wait a minute, what is the virtue? What is the thing that helped the people of God throughout the Old Testament that seems to be the foundational element of the people of God in the first century, as Paul is preaching and teaching the church in Ephesus, Corinth, Galatia? And I'm like, wait a minute, he keeps talking about humility. Put on humility. Be Philippians 2, 8 through 9. Be like Jesus, who took
Mhm.
on humility, became human in order that God might exalt him. And so yeah, that kind of has been my journey and trajectory into this.
Well, and at some point, we will chat just a little bit about what you began to discover specifically about humility in the Word when you were studying that thematically. But I want to go back to when you're holding your son. And really, for me, and I think this is true for you from what you've written, is there's that feeling of panic, of
Hmm.
anxiety, of it's not our natural response to just go into a calm mode of whether you want to call it peace, which overflows out of humility. It's that like, oh my gosh, just panic mode, right? You're the opposite of a non-anxious presence.
Yes, absolutely.
And so how did you write quite a bit about how humility is a great answer to panic and
Hmm.
anxiety and weakness. And so flesh that out for us a little bit. Like, what do you mean? How is humility a good anecdote to those things?
I basically define humility as a three-part movement. So,
Mhm.
humility is first an awareness of God. Second, if I know who God is, I can know who I am. So then awareness of ourselves, and then third, I can know other people. And the order
Mm,
matters. The order absolutely matters. Often, what ends up happening is humility centered either on myself or other
mm.
people, and then God is an afterthought. And what that does is disordered. View or perception of humility is going to result in disordered relationships and
Oh,
chaos in our
good word.
lives, you know?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so like I want to focus on keeping that order right. And then what you find out is like, okay, God is holding all things in control. This is John chapter 1,
Yep.
right? The God is the king of the cosmos, and he created all things and he sustains all things through his word, and even the things that are falling apart are not outside of the providence of God. And
Mm.
whether it's on this side of eternity or not, that he is in the process of recreation, new creation. This is the story of God throughout the scriptures. And then the second thing is like, okay, if I can have a sense of peace knowing that I am not in control, God is in control, then the second thing is that if God is in control, then I am not outside of God's control.
Mm.
God is actually in control over my life. So that's the second part of me. And then the third
Mm.
thing is like, wait a minute, if God is in control and God's in control of my life and he is with me and he's walking through these things with me, that is true of other people. And so what ends up happening is that humility isn't an ace card for us to
Mm.
not experience hurt or to avoid pain. Humility is a gracious gift to walk with us through it where we are. And this, I think, potentially might be the greatest payoff of humility. We have the gift of self-awareness in the midst of those painful hard things,
Mm.
that we're not left alone. This is the
Yes.
whole
Amen.
anthem of Psalm 46, that the Lord of hosts is with us. And every time you and I ask for answers, God is determined, like we're asking why, God is determined to give us the who, like
Mm.
who he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
This is the whole story of Job. And so yeah, I think that for me in that moment I'm holding Luke, I came to a place where the panic and out of control
Mhm.
was there. I'm not saying that it wasn't there,
Right, right, yes.
right? And I don't want
It's
people to
how
feel like,
long does
wait
it
a
stay
minute.
there?
Yeah,
That's the difference.
it's how long does it stay there, and it's when it's there who meets you in it,
Yes. Oh,
you
yes.
know? And so what happened with me is there was a dialogue that took
Mm,
place
mhm.
where my panic and my anxiety was fleshed out, obviously in my body language and sweat and all this other stuff, but also
Right.
internally in my dialogue with the Lord. And I actually went into a kind of a prayer conversation with
Yep.
God of just an honest, like, here's how I'm feeling. And then God responded, the Lord of hosts is with you. Here's how I'm feeling.
Mm,
God responded, the Lord of hosts is with you. And I feel like humility ends up becoming this muscle that we exercise. And the more that we're exercising it, then the situations of the tension of the panic start to slow and
mhm,
close the gap a bit.
mhm.
And again, I want to be clear. I think a theology that is unlivable is unhelpful. So I don't want to give you an unlivable theology,
Yep.
and I want to give you a mixed or unrealistic expectation of what humility is. Humility will not stop the hurt. Humility
That's
will
right.
not prevent the pain. Like actually, like my friend Ann Voskamp once said this to me in dinner. We're hanging out as with our family, and she looked over and she goes, Joel, Jesus promised two things in this world, in this life. One is
Trouble.
there's going to be pain. Yeah, there's going to be pain. And the second he'll be with us.
Mhm.
You know, I'm like, all right, two promises. And that he's going to be with us, and the pain, the bridge between that is humility, in my perspective.
Hmm. That is an interesting perspective because I even hear you saying, um, for me, it's so much of why like habits and practices do matter. And it's so easy for someone to hear that habits and practices matter so that you can keep control. Like if I do all of these things, then all of these things will happen. But no, what it's for is that when all of these things start happening, like you said, you go into a prayer dialogue because that has become a natural habit for you. And that just de-escalates all of the things. It doesn't take them away, right? But it's a de-escalation of the panic.
And I think that's so profound, Amber. I think it's also a training, a type
Yes.
of spiritual practical training
Yeah.
that I remember when I was playing basketball in high school, and even with my kids now when they're training for football or basketball, whatever is in practice, if they slack off, I'm always on
Oh,
them. I'm like,
same.
guys, if you're running suicides and you're giving up at the very end, like,
You're not reaching down and touching the line.
touch the line
Touch the
every.
line,
But
Joel.
dad, I might be last. I don't care if you're last. Like, that's not the point. The
Amen.
point is do the 100% of your effort in practice, because what we're trying to emulate in practice is when you're on the free throw line and you're exhausted and it's the
Yep.
fourth quarter and you just have to make two free throws to win the game. You will have already, your body has been trained to already be
That's right.
in that position.
Yep.
And I think, like, it's like fascinating to me that we know these things in
I know.
almost every area of our lives, right? And I'm not a fan of the sacred and secular divide. I think that's
Yeah.
actually an unhelpful
I a
categorization.
100%.
I think everything is sacred, and the sacred ought to invade into the secular, right? That's how
Mhm.
it should work. And so I think principally the same thing. It's like, listen, when we're committed to praying, when we're committed to daily Bible reading, when we're committed to go this Sunday, I mean, in full transparency, Amber, my wife and I woke up like, we don't want to go to church.
Yeah.
It's been a busy season. I'm exhausted
Yep.
personally. I'm traveled last week. I'm gonna travel again this week. Like, and we just looked at each other. Guys, we're like, okay, we're gonna have that. We're gonna go. Like,
I know.
we're not negotiating with us. Actually, I heard Kobe Bryant say this in an interview the other day. He's like, I'm not gonna negotiate with myself. There's a negotiation. I signed a
Mm,
contract. He's like, I'm gonna get up in the morning. I'm gonna practice. I'm not negotiating with myself. And I was like, ooh, that's so good.
that's wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not, like, when it comes to the things of God, I'm not negotiating with myself.
Yeah,
Like,
and
I'm a
we
citizen
so
of God's
often
kingdom. We're
negotiate
negotiating.
that first.
Yes. And humility, this is where I think humility is so important. Humility is the gift of self-awareness so that we can
Mm.
be aware when we start the negotiation process.
Ooh.
And humility is like, oh, no, no, no. Like, you have committed yourself to the things of
Mm.
God, and there is a payoff there that is, one, about presence. You can learn to experience the presence of God. And secondly,
Yeah.
like, that is the power that we long for, the
Yeah.
peace that we're searching for in the midst of really, really difficult things. And so I think you nailed it in that sense of, there's a reason why we ought to
Mhm.
pursue these things and to I talk about humility often as a thing that we cultivate in our
Yeah.
life. So
Yes. Yes, I love it. Well, so then tell me this, when you did begin studying, because it does so much in the word. I mean, we hear the word humility, but it's a whole different thing to really look at the text as a whole and to see like what you discover about whether it's tracing the kingdom or whether it's tracing, the tree or something like humility. What are some of the things that you discovered that maybe surprised you as you put in those 1,000 hours of studying humility in the Word?
yeah, I would say one of the things, and why I think people may be interested in really processing through the pages of this book, is what I didn't know coming into this. I had assumed humility is a post Genesis 3 kind of like gift that we have now, is we wait for Eden to come, like all that kind of stuff. And what I was fascinated about is actually humility is the natural state of humanity in the Garden of Eden
Okay.
in Genesis 1 and 2. Think about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
This is
So
the
how
the the
so?
word
Yeah.
the word picture, right? The word picture is this. You've got the divine God, King of the cosmos on high,
Mhm.
who is determined to make humanity. He goes and he bends, like, this is the picture that is portrayed. He bends, comes low, he forms humanity, Adam from the dust. That Hebrew word Adama is related to humanity, Adam. Um, forms them from the dust from the ground. This is a place of lowliness. In that place of low, God breathes the breath of life
Yeah.
into we have done nothing to deserve any of this. And then God says that we're given the gift of the image of God. And the image of God, it means that we're made in his likeness and his image. Two Hebrew words, shelem and demut. And these two Hebrew words were used in ancient Near Eastern texts to describe children of the divine king. So here
Mm.
you are, children of royalty that came from the ground, that
Yeah.
came from the dust and elevated up. And then the fascinating detail is just that God put or placed humanity on Eden or in Eden. Well, where's Eden? Eden is on a mountain.
Mm.
So now you go from the low, and
To the
God is the one who
high.
exalts us and places high. What have we done? Nothing to
Mm.
deserve it, but it's still given to us as a gracious gift. And so what I found is actually humility. And think about Adam and Eve's relationship with God in Eden. It was a place of true vulnerability. I found that the English word vulnerable, it comes from a Latin noun and a verb, which means open to being wounded, the possibility of being
Oh,
wounded.
wow.
Right. And so, fascinatingly, in Eden, Adam and Eve had no fear of being wounded externally from God, right? But they could
Oh.
wound themselves internally. And that's what they
Mm.
did. And
Mm.
so, Adam and Eve's natural state, humanity's natural state in the Garden of Eden prior to the fall, was a posture and a position of humility. They were fully aware of God in Eden. They
Mhm.
walked and talked with God. They were fully aware of who they were, made in the likeness and image of God. And they were fully aware of how they ought to relate to each
Mm.
other image bearers. This is the
Right.
definition of humility. And that detail tells me that when you and I today participate, practice, and retrieve the what I feels like is a lost discipline of humility, what we're actually doing is regaining our true humanity. We're going
Wow.
back to the ideal condition that God wanted us to always be in a posture of humility before God. And it's fascinating that when our first response that we have cultivated is a life of humility, it seems to take the dial of chaos and tension and dysfunction and relational disorder, and it dials it down because we're learning how to rightly relate to other people through the lens of the greatness of God.
Mm. Well, and when I hear you talk about when we begin to practice humility, we're going back to what was original to God's design of us. It does make me think about how hard it is to just begin practicing humility.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where is a good place? What are some ways to begin playing that out in your own personal life when we live in a culture that is so just all about self promotion and you can't get the next thing unless it's just all about me, 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 me. Um, and the danger of also false humility. Like you said, there's these three relationship and they got to be in the order they're in.
Yep.
Because as soon as you don't acknowledge God and you don't take care of yourself, you're living over here in world number 3, which is
Mm-hmm.
false humility and
Mm-hmm.
not healthy relationships. So, tell us a little bit about practically cultivating humility in our lives.
Yeah, so I say in the book, wouldn't it be so nice if humility was a checkbox that we could
Oh
check
my
off and move
gosh.
on from? And
Most
yet,
things in my spiritual life, I wish that were the case,
right,
Joel.
right, and yet, Jesus and the scriptures remind us that humility is not a checkbox that we check
No.
off and move on from. Humility is, in fact, the very soil of the Christian life that we ought to live from.
Ah,
And so, like all good soil, we have to cultivate it. We've
yep.
got to look at it. We've got to evaluate it. What's there? What's not there? What should be there? What's there that we need to remove? All these questions. I would just say this. Good news, really great news, is that we're actually being presented with the opportunities to cultivate humility on a daily basis. And here's what I mean by that. Our weaknesses, our
Mm,
limitations, the places that we suffer, the places that we're anxious, the places that we're frustrated and angry. These are all places that God is inviting us to exchange our
mm,
ability, our strength, our determination to do this thing on our own. Me, myself, and I call it the unholy trinity. And in its place, in surrender, open our hands and say, Lord, what do you want? Like, what do you want to teach me in this moment? How do you want me to exercise love? How do you want me to exercise patience? This is the fruit of the spirit in action. How will these things bring you glory? How will these things show the world that
yeah.
we're faithful ambassadors of Christ, because the way of Jesus is an upside down way to the world that actually, when they experience, they're drawn to. you
Mm,
know? So what are those
mm.
things? Let me give you now a very practical one. Um, Wildest thing happened yesterday, and I'm being like so serious. This you can, ask my wife. We literally, I stepped out of the van yesterday to go to church, and I stepped in a weird way, and my left knee just did a like a pain, instant pain throughout my entire
Now I
knee.
know we're close to the same age.
Right? I'm like, I didn't do it. And I play basketball every Tuesday night. Right. So I'm like, I'm hooping all the time. I'm like, of all the places and how for this type of pain to happen, for me to be literally stepping out of my minivan.
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh, this is weird. And it kind of, I'm fine. I could walk around, but every now and then, if I step on it weird, that a sharp pain kind of goes through my knee. So yesterday I thought, no big deal. This has happened to me before. I'm fine.
Oh
Well,
no.
I did my ice pack, did all that kind of stuff last night. This morning I woke up, stepped out. I'm like, oh, I'm fine. Took the next step, sharp pain.
Yeah.
And so in the past, I would just be like, I'll be fine. It's gonna be okay. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's pride. I
Mm.
know that there is something not right
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
knee. And I have an opportunity. Like I'm in a position where I can like go to the doctor and get this checked out. And so I exercised humility. And my wife helped me when she was like, hey, the ortho clinic is right down the street and they have an appointment today. And I was like, oh, I've got a busy day. I've got all this. And she's like, can you move any room meetings? I was like, well, technically I could move this one and it would be
She's
the
like, you
perfect
probably
timing.
should.
You probably should. I'm like, and I'm having this internal debate. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I'm going to accept that I'm getting old. My body doesn't work the way that it used to. And I'm supposed to play basketball tomorrow night. I need to know what's going on with this knee. Is this just something random? Can I put a brace on it? Do I need to take a couple weeks off? And I have a feeling it might be a meniscus issue.
I was just getting
Like,
ready to say, I think it's probably a meniscus tear.
and if it's a menisc exactly, and if that's I'm like, are they gonna have to go in and clean it out? Like all those questions, right? And so this was me practicing, cultivating humility, right? Another very practical one for you guys is when you're wrong and your kids are right.
Ooh, yes.
Okay, not my favorite one, but again, my wife actually helps me a lot with this one. Just saying I'm sorry, guys.
Mm-hmm.
You were right. My bad. Dad got it wrong.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Thank you. This is an act of sanctification in our lives. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, more than you are right in all the other things, I have a suspicion. I'm very early on with our children, right? 12, 10, and 8 and 4 years old. But I have a suspicion that those are the moments they're going to look back at in their adult years. That's going to cultivate relational
Mm-hmm.
intimacy between us. Like, okay, mom and dad were like, they would apologize. And
Yep.
so I think those are just some very practical places that we can cultivate humility, where we're reminded who we are in light of who God is and how we ought to relate to other people.
I love it because same 14, 12, and 8 are my kids' ages. And that is something I didn't see modeled for me growing up were apologies. And it's something that my husband has said when we've talked about our different families growing up, because it wasn't like either one of our families were perfect or didn't do a lot of great things too. But one of the big things is my parents said they were sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, that's what my husband says all the time. Like, I think that that's a big difference maker. And then when it comes to just this idea of humility, and what I know you're not saying is just sweep it all under the rug and move on
Mm-hmm.
like everything's okay, because I hear you talking about that internal dialogue that requires us to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
engage with the living God through conversation so that you can respond in a humble way. Because so often, what I see humility becoming is I just sit back and say and do nothing. And y'all, that's false humility. That's not
Right.
humility. So I
Right.
don't know if you have anything to say to that, but the internal dialogue with, I guess it's not internal, but between you and the Father is such an important thing.
Yeah, I have a whole chapter in the book called how to, I think the title is called How to Keep Your Heart Soft and Be Firm.
Mm,
And it's basically a biblical theology of humility and boundaries,
yeah.
where I actually argue that humility is the key in order to establish boundaries and then
Yeah.
evaluate boundaries so that we have them appropriate, that we're not building prisons instead.
Mm,
And so what ends up happening with boundaries is sometimes we construct the right boundaries in the right times, but we never go back to evaluate those boundaries as relationships change, as people mature, as health takes place. And so, what the gift of humility for us is the ability to, again, regain self awareness. Has this person
Mhm.
grown? Have I grown? Has actually, do we need to build tighter boundaries because this thing has derailed even further, you know? Humility helps us look at those things and to act appropriately.
Mm.
Humility is not an invitation to be walked all over and to be
Right.
mistreated. Because think about this, if humility is an awareness of God and an awareness of ourselves, and if we're made in the likeness and image of God and we allow other people to disrespect and walk all over us, that is an
Mm.
offense against the image of God that we bear. That's serious. That's
Oh,
a serious
yeah.
issue. So humility reminds us of that and says, hey, no, like I joked with a friend the other day. I was like, you and I get to walk with just a little bit of a swagger. I say just a little bit, not because of who we are, but because of whose we are. Because we
Oh.
are children of the King. Like my kids, it's kind of wild when they walk into church every now and then. They'll kind of walk around and they'll run around. They'll kind of like act like they run the place, you know. And I'm like,
Yes,
well,
mine too.
and I'm like, guys, like dad's like on the teaching team here. I preach maybe 3 or 5 times a year. But that little thing, and I was telling my pastor Darwin about this other day. He was like, well, they kind of do, like, they know who their dad is. They're kind of they kind of walk with
Mm.
a little bit of swagger. And he's like, Joel, my son, my children have done that before. Like, it's fine. Like,
Yeah.
that. But the main thing is don't let it get to their head.
Yeah.
Don't ever let it get
Yes.
disconnected and you begin to believe, oh no, I deserve this. Oh no, I am this. It's like, no, you're not. It's just
Yeah.
a great gift that God has given
Well,
you to exercise.
and isn't that also when that slips into that pride vein,
Mm-hmm.
slowly slipping in, humility says, wait, I'm not valuing the image of God in other people
Yes.
when I act like I deserve it over someone else, or I have the right to be this way because of who I am, so there,
Yes.
that is again, once again, the humility aspect of knowing whose you are and walking with your swagger without failing to recognize that other people have the swagger too.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I love it. Okay, well, let's close with this. When you think about humility in your own personal life, because as you said, you were someone who you began to hold that close, but it was a way of protection.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find yourself really fighting against that now when you begin to see that those, traumatic triggers, whatever you want to call them, creep back in?
Yeah, so I actually what I've found is I have to be really careful of what I refer to in the book as hidden pride.
Mm,
Hidden pride presents itself as the fruit of the spirit. So it presents itself as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, like all that kind of stuff. But in the
mm.
inside, it's corrupt. In the
Whew.
inside, so the fruit of the spirit is aimed outward towards God and towards the edification of God's people. Hidden pride is all the fruit of the spirit, but the aim and the ambition isn't outward; it's inward. It's
Mhm.
actually idolatry. And so for me, I actually had some dear friends, Dr. Alison Cook, and then Jim Crust, my dear friend from
Mhm.
a podcast that we co-host, and I asked them to speak into these areas. So I've got their kind of paragraphs that are in the book in this chapter, and they both kind of just affirm that what we absolutely need is a dialogue partner for the
Mm,
conversations that are taking place in our heart that we keep isolated in an echo chamber. And it just
mm,
reaffirms this idea that the Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. Those conversations can derail us. And
oof.
so, one, we invite the Holy Spirit to illuminate the dark chambers of our human heart that we're having those conversations. And then secondarily, we invite other people, trusted
Yeah.
people,
Yep.
if you're married, your spouse, if you've got a therapist, like your therapist, like,
Mhm.
if you're part of a covenant community, a small group,
Yep.
something like that, some people that you trust. And I think it's important. Again, this is where the humility piece is vital. It's not just everybody and anybody. It's
Right.
trusted people that show spiritual maturity and wisdom or are trained in this specific area.
Mm,
And so for me, that's been a huge one because if I can get better at the identifying the conversations that are actually laced in some type of hidden pride or have the potential to go sideways, I can actually cut off the development of full blown pride and arrogance in my
mm,
life. And I want to be proactive as much as I can,
yep.
as I continue to grow and mature in Christ.
Mm. Thank you so much, Joel. I appreciate your time, your work, what you continue to do theologically. If people want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so every Tuesday I do a thing on my Instagram called Theology Talk Tuesday. And so my Instagram handle is just my last name at MUDDAMALLE. And then that's also muddam.com. My last name is also my website. And so on there, I've got courses and devotionals and a newsletter that you can sign up to as well. But those are the places. And then I'm on the podcast called Therapy and Theology that I get to co-host with my friends Lisa Turkhurst and Jim Kress. So if you enjoy any of this therapy talk and you want to see how it's laced with theology, I think you'll enjoy that podcast series from Proverbs 31 Ministries.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough podcast. Tune in next time.